On a cold night in November 1971, a man known only as D.B. Cooper hijacked a Northwest Orient Airlines flight, demanded $200,000 in ransom, and parachuted into the darkness over the Pacific Northwest. He was never seen again. No body, no parachute, and no clear trace of the money were ever found. To this day, Cooper's daring escape remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. The story begins on the afternoon of November 24, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving. At Portland International Airport, a man in his mid-40s purchased a one-way ticket to Seattle using the name Dan Cooper. Dressed in a business suit with a black tie and carrying a briefcase, he appeared ordinary, almost forgettable. He boarded Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, a short 30-minute trip that seemed routine to the crew and passengers. Once seated, Cooper ordered a drink, a bourbon and soda, and calmly lit a cigarette, blending into the cabin like any other traveler. But moments after takeoff, he handed a folded note to a flight attendant. At first, she assumed it was just another man trying to flirt, but Cooper leaned closer and whispered, "Miss, you'd better take a look at that note. I have a bomb." Inside the briefcase, he revealed a bundle of wires and red sticks, convincing enough to leave no doubt. His voice remained calm, his demeanor almost polite, but his demands were firm. He wanted $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck ready to refuel the plane upon arrival in Seattle. There would be no negotiation. The crew, shaken but determined to keep the passengers safe, relayed his demands to the authorities. While most on board remained unaware of the unfolding crisis, the flight attendants served drinks and reassured travelers. Outside the cabin, the FBI scrambled to gather the money, prepared to meet Cooper's every request. A hijacking was underway, and the man who called himself Dan Cooper was about to vanish into legend. As Flight 305 circled Seattle, waiting for authorities to gather the ransom and equipment, Cooper remained composed. He never raised his voice, never threatened violence beyond the quiet reminder of the briefcase resting beside him. Passengers had little idea of the drama unfolding, believing the delay was due to routine mechanical issues. The calm inside the cabin masked the chaos brewing on the ground. By the time the plane landed, night had fallen and rain poured over the tarmac. Law enforcement kept their distance, fearing a sudden explosion if they interfered. An airline representative delivered the ransom, $200,000 in small bills packed into a canvas bag, along with 4 parachutes as requested. Cooper inspected the items carefully, showing surprising knowledge of the equipment. He rejected none of it, only reminding the crew to keep the engines running. True to his word, he allowed all 36 passengers to leave unharmed. They stepped off the plane into the rainy night, confused but relieved, still unaware that they had been hostages. Only the crew remained on board, 4 flight attendants and the pilots, each of them under Cooper's quiet command. Cooper then laid out his instructions for the next leg of the flight. The plane was to head south toward Mexico City, fly at a low altitude of 10,000 feet, and keep its speed slow. The cabin lights were dimmed, the shades drawn, and the crew was ordered to remain in the cockpit. At that moment it was clear this was no ordinary hijacking. Cooper had a plan, one that seemed rehearsed, calculated, and strangely precise. The man in the black suit was preparing for an escape no one had ever dared attempt before. The plane took off again at 7:40 p.m., lifting into the stormy skies over Seattle. Rain battered the fuselage, and fierce winds rocked the cabin, but Cooper remained unfazed. He sat alone at the rear of the aircraft, the bag of ransom money beside him and the parachutes within reach. The crew stayed in the cockpit, following his orders to avoid sudden maneuvers or any attempt at interference. Somewhere over the rugged forests of Washington, Cooper's plan moved to its final stage. He ordered the crew to slow the plane, lower the landing gear, and depressurize the cabin. These unusual requests puzzled the pilots, but Cooper seemed to know exactly what he was doing. He then directed the flight attendants to the cockpit, leaving him alone in the cabin. At 8:13 p.m., the crew felt a sudden jolt, a shift in the aircraft's weight that suggested the rear stairway had been lowered. Moments later, the pressure indicator in the cockpit confirmed what they feared. Cooper had opened the rear exit door. In the middle of a storm, Thousands of feet above the dark forests, he stepped into the night. Carrying the heavy bag of cash and strapped into a parachute, Cooper leapt from the Boeing 727 into the howling wind. No one saw him go, and no one would ever see him again. By the time the plane landed in Reno for refueling and inspection, the rear stairs were still down, but the hijacker was gone. The man called D.B. Cooper had vanished into the storm, leaving behind nothing but questions. The moment Cooper leapt into the storm, the mystery was born. The FBI launched one of the largest manhunts in American history, deploying helicopters, planes, and ground teams to scour the forests of southern Washington. Search parties combed through the rugged terrain near the Lewis River and Mount St. Helens, braving freezing rain and thick woods. Yet, despite their efforts, no trace of Cooper was found. No parachute, no equipment, not even a body. Investigators quickly realized the scope of the challenge. The night of Cooper's jump had been treacherous, with heavy winds and temperatures below freezing. Experts argued that his survival was nearly impossible. Jumping at night into dense forests without proper gear seemed like a death sentence. Still, the absence of evidence left room for doubt. Had he perished in the wilderness, or had he slipped away unseen? The ransom money presented another puzzle. Each of the $20 bills had been carefully recorded, their serial numbers noted to track any future use. For months, banks across the country monitored deposits, waiting for a bill to surface. Yet no one spent the money, and not a single trace appeared. The FBI interviewed hundreds of suspects, from former paratroopers to ex-convicts, anyone with the skill or motive to attempt such a daring escape. Composite sketches of a middle-aged man in sunglasses were circulated nationwide, turning D.B. Cooper into a household name. But every lead seemed to collapse into dead ends, and the trail grew colder with each passing year. As the years passed, the legend of D.B. Cooper only grew. The FBI kept the case open, following thousands of leads, but the truth remained elusive. Suspects emerged and faded, each with a story that seemed plausible but lacked definitive proof. Some were war veterans with parachuting experience, others petty criminals with daring reputations. None could be tied to the crime with certainty. Theories split into two camps, those who believed Cooper had perished in the jump, and those convinced he had outsmarted the FBI. Investigators pointed to the severe weather, the dense forests, and the perilous landing conditions, arguing that even an experienced paratrooper would have struggled to survive. Yet believers in Cooper's survival noted his calm demeanor, his knowledge of flight operations, and his precise demands. Could such a careful planner have miscalculated so badly? In 1980, a discovery reignited the mystery. A young boy camping along the Columbia River stumbled upon $5,800 in decaying $20 bills buried in the sand. The serial numbers matched the ransom money. How the cash ended up miles from the supposed jump zone baffled investigators. Had it washed downstream from where Cooper fell, or had someone buried it deliberately as a diversion? The find deepened the puzzle instead of solving it. If Cooper had died, where was the rest of the money? If he had lived, why had he never spent a single bill? The mystery twisted tighter, feeding the legend. Each clue raised more questions than it answered, ensuring that Cooper's disappearance remained unsolved and unforgettable. By the late 20th century, D.B. Cooper had transcended crime to become a cultural icon. He was celebrated in songs, novels, and even films, portrayed as a folk hero who outwitted the authorities and vanished into thin air. Bars and festivals bore his name, and countless Americans claimed to have crossed paths with him after his daring escape. The myth of Cooper became as powerful as the man himself. For investigators, however, the case was far from romantic. The FBI had amassed tens of thousands of documents, interviewed countless witnesses, and pursued more than 1,000 suspects. Some candidates stood out. Richard McCoy, a former Green Beret, executed a nearly identical hijacking in 1972 but was caught soon after. Many believed he and Cooper were one and the same, though differences in appearance and method kept the link unproven. Others pointed to Kenneth Christensen, a former flight attendant with knowledge of Boeing 727 aircraft, and Dwayne Webber, who allegedly confessed on his deathbed to being Cooper. Each new suspect reignited the debate, but without physical evidence, certainty was impossible. The case became a tug-of-war between fact and folklore. For every expert claiming Cooper had died in the wilderness, there was another who swore he had survived, blending into society with a new identity. The truth seemed always just out of reach, hidden beneath layers of rumor, speculation, and wishful thinking. As years turned into decades, the trail grew colder, but the fascination only deepened. Cooper was no longer just a criminal. He was a symbol of mystery, defiance, and the enduring allure of the unsolved. As the new millennium began, the FBI continued its pursuit of answers, though time was working against them. Witnesses aged, suspects passed away, and memories blurred. Yet the fascination with Cooper refused to fade. In 2007, the Bureau re-released evidence to the public, including ransom bill serial numbers, hoping that fresh eyes might reveal new leads. Amateur sleuths, journalists, and conspiracy theorists seized on the opportunity, turning the case into a nationwide obsession once again. Some pointed to scientific analysis of the evidence. Particles of titanium were found on Cooper's clip-on tie, leading experts to speculate that he may have worked in the aerospace or chemical industries. This detail suggested a man with technical knowledge, not just a reckless gambler. Yet even this promising clue failed to narrow the list of suspects. The rise of the internet gave the mystery a second life. Entire forums and websites were dedicated to piecing together every detail of the hijacking, debating flight paths, weather conditions, and possible landing zones. Some argued Cooper landed safely and lived quietly under a new identity. Others insisted he had been swallowed by the wilderness, his remains undiscovered. Despite the endless debate, the FBI quietly began to lose momentum. By 2016, after 45 years of investigation, the Bureau officially closed the case, admitting that the trail had gone cold. Still, they left one door open. If new, concrete evidence ever surfaced, they would be ready to revisit the legend of the man who vanished into the night sky. Even with the FBI case officially closed, the legend of D.B. Cooper lives on. Each year, new books, documentaries, and theories emerge, keeping the mystery alive in the public imagination. To many, Cooper is not remembered as a criminal, but as a symbol of defiance, an ordinary man who challenged authority, vanished into the wilderness, and left behind a riddle no one could solve. Festivals in Washington celebrate his name, with locals raising a toast each November to the mysterious hijacker who disappeared into storm clouds. Conspiracy theories flourish, from claims that Cooper was a former CIA operative to suggestions that he staged the perfect escape and lived out his days quietly in small-town America. Some insist that the money found on the Columbia River was planted to mislead investigators, while others argue it was simply the final trace of a failed getaway. Yet the most haunting aspect of the case is its silence. Despite decades of searching, no definitive answers have surfaced. Cooper's parachute was never recovered, his body never found, and most of the ransom money remains missing. The man in the black suit and dark glasses walked onto a plane and then, in a single daring leap, stepped into legend. Whether he died in the wilderness or lived under a false identity, the truth has been swallowed by time. The name D.B. Cooper now belongs as much to folklore as to history, a reminder that some mysteries endure not because of what we know, but because of what we never will. More than 50 years have passed since D.B. Cooper leapt into the night sky, yet his fate remains unknown. No body, no parachute, and almost none of the money have ever surfaced. His name has become legend, a mystery that outlived the investigation itself. Perhaps he died in the storm, or perhaps he lived quietly in the shadows. Either way, D.B. Cooper's story endures as America's most daring unsolved crime.